Class is an enchantment subtype that was introduced in Dungeons & Dragons Adventures in the Forgotten Realms, and it's designed to be Magic's version of classes in D&D. Each class enchantment starts at level 1 and has a base effect, and you can pay a mana cost at sorcery speed to level them up to level 2, at which point it gains a new effect. And once they are level 2, you can also pay to take them to level 3, at which point the class is entirely unlocked and you get all of its effects. Class enchantments have proven to be very powerful, since many of them give you decent effects as a baseline and get super powerful when you unlock them fully. There are only 27 of them, but 15 of them have at least one top 8 at a major event. In this video, we'll look at the 10 that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic the Gathering. This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. Use the links in the description to visit their store. Before we get started, here's a quick reminder on how I rank cards in these videos. A first tier top 8 is worth 2 points. This includes events like Pro Tours. And a second tier top 8 is worth 1 point. This includes events like regional championships. At number 10, it's Builder's Talent. In addition to appearing in Adventures in the Forgotten Realms, the class subtype also showed up in a big way in Bloomborough, where they all have talent in the name. Anyway, for one generic and a white, Builder's Talent gives you a 0/4 when it enters. You can upgrade it to level 2 for only 1 white mana, at which point, whenever one or more non-creature non-land permanents you control enter, you put a +1/+1 counter on one of your creatures. You can also upgrade it to level 3 for 4 generic and a white, in which case it returns a non-creature non-land permanent from your graveyard to the battlefield. Many of the best classes all do something immediately when they enter, and while paying 2 mana for a 0/4 isn't great, it doesn't take much effort to get this to level 2, which is pretty powerful. And obviously when you upgrade it to level 3, you're going to be getting a counter in addition to your best non-creature non-land back from your graveyard. This class is a very impressive value engine, and the fact you get that 0/4 up front gives you more time to squeeze as much juice as you can out of Builder's Talent. Its points have largely come in white control decks in Standard that run lots of non-creatures. Really, the only creature permanent card in the deck is Beza, and Beza can actually make a treasure, which will also trigger Builder's Talent and give you a counter. It's only seeing sporadic play in Standard, and some other classes stand a good chance of passing it in the future. I would also like to take a moment to thank Builder's Talent for being in Bloomborough Limited, which was mostly a very uninteresting format, but Builder's Talent decks were a lot of fun, especially when you got multiples. At number 9, it's Bandit's Talent. For 1 generic and a black, when it enters, it makes each opponent discard 2 cards unless they discard a non-land card. You can upgrade it to level 2 for 1 black, and then it gains a triggered ability that checks to see if your opponent has 1 or fewer cards in their hand during their upkeep, and if they do, they lose 2 life. And you can upgrade it to level 3 for 3 generic and a black, which lets you draw a card at the beginning of your draw step for each opponent who has 1 or fewer cards in hand. While this doesn't add to the board like Builder's Talent, it does make sure to take at least 1 card away from your opponent when it enters, and then it has 2 effects that punish them in a big way for not having very many cards in hand. Unsurprisingly, it's been played in discard-heavy decks in Standard and Pioneer. In Standard, it's sometimes featured in Orzhov Midrange, and in Legacy, it's played alongside Waste Not, which is one of the most powerful discard payoffs in the game. Bandit's Talent looks well positioned to put up more top 8s in the future. At number 8, it's Bard's Class. For a red and a green, it makes it so that legendary creatures you control enter the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter. You can pay a red and a green to take it to level 2, at which point it makes your legendary creatures cost a red and a green less to cast, and you can take it to level 3 for 3 generic a red and a green, which makes it so that casting a legendary spell exiles 2 cards from your library, and you can play them this turn. This class is all about playing legendary creatures, since it makes it so they enter as larger creatures, decreases their cost, and effectively draws you extra cards when you cast legendary spells. Since 2022, Bard class decks have been a factor in Pioneer, and as you'd expect, these decks run lots of legendary creatures, as well as payoffs for them like Kamigawa Channel Lands and Mox Amber. These decks can even pull off some combo shenanigans by running legendary creatures that cost exactly a red and a green, which will be free when you have level 2 unlocked, like Targnar and Hajar, and if you have Burgi in play when you're doing all of that, you have more than enough mana to win the game since you're casting spells at a big discount or even for free while generating mana and drawing more cards. While Bard class decks have never dominated Pioneer, they have been around in the format for 2 years at this point, so I think it's safe to say it could get more top 8s in the future. At number 7, it's Paladin class. For 1 white mana, it makes your opponent's spells cost 1 generic more if they cast them during your turn. You can level it up for 2 generic and a white, and then it gives your board +1/+1, and you can pay 4 generic and a white for level 3, at which point Paladin class triggers when you attack, giving a creature double strike and +1/+1 for each other attacking creature. So, this starts out as a bit of a hate card, taxing your opponent for trying to do stuff on your turn, but as you level it up, it starts to make your board way better, first by offering a buff to everything, and later by offering a huge buff to one thing. Paladin class's points have mostly come in Standard, where it appeared in a wide variety of white aggro decks, including Mono White, Orzhov, and Azorius. These decks all loved every single chapter of it, since Chapter 1 made it harder for your opponent to interact with your creatures, and the other chapters make your board way better. These decks also ran plenty of cards that were great at going wide, like Wedding Announcement and Legion Angel, so it could really leverage level 2 and 3. Paladin class also has a single legacy point from an Enchantress deck. These decks run lots of enchantment payoffs, most notably Argothi and Enchantress, and when you get value out of playing enchantments in the first place, cheap ones become a lot better, and Paladin class is a cheap one that can give you some enchantment payoff triggers early before offering an impact to the board later in the game. But Paladin class doesn't have any top 8 since 2022. At number 6, it's Artist's Talent. For 1 generic and a red, it allows you to discard a card when you cast a non-creature spell, and if you do, you draw a card. You can get it to level 2 for 2 generic and a red, and then your non-creature spells cost 1 generic less to cast, and you can take it to level 3 for 2 generic and a red, which makes your sources of non-combat damage do 2 extra damage. Obviously, this talent is all about spells. Rummaging when you cast them is a nice way to find more of them, and decreasing their cost to make your spells way better, and of course augmenting your sources of damage is great if you're in a red-based spell deck, because many red spells do damage. This class hasn't seen much play in Standard, but it's quickly found homes in both Pioneer and Modern. In Pioneer, it's been played in Arclight Phoenix decks. These are spell-heavy decks that also love drawing and discarding cards since you can get the Phoenix back, and discarding cards can also help fuel cards like Treasure Cruise. This talent is also used in Pioneer Lotus Field decks, which specialize in untapping Lotus Field over and over again with spells like Pour Over the Pages, and the cost reduction effect on Artist's Talent allows you to net even more mana every time you untap Lotus Field. And in Modern, the talent helped revive Storm decks alongside Ruby Medallion, which got a reprint in Modern Horizons 3. These decks look to cast as many spells as possible in a turn, and of course, cost reduction and rummaging can help you continue to chain them together. And it also means your rituals can net even more mana. These decks typically win by casting Grape Shot, and while you don't usually have your Artist's Talent at level 3 in this deck, it can potentially make Grape Shot win with an even lower Storm count. Artist's Talent looks very likely to continue to power spell-based decks in Modern and Pioneer going forward. At number 5, it's Storm Chaser's Talent, which like Artist's Talent is very into spells. For 1 blue mana, it creates a 1/1 blue and red otter creature token with prowess when it enters. You can pay 3 generic and a blue to take it to level 2, at which point you get to return an instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand, and then you can pay 5 generic and a blue for level 3, at which point you get a 1/1 prowess otter anytime you cast an instant or sorcery. This class gives you a pretty decent body up front, and then later in the game you can get a lot of value out of it. It's been fairly heavily played in Standard, showing up in a variety of decks, most notably the so-called Talented Otters deck, which gets its name from this talent. This is a tempo deck that can also combo off with Enduring Vitality, a bunch of otters, and Valley Floodcaller. Anytime you cast a non-creature spell, the Floodcaller gives all of your birds, frogs, otters, and rats +1/+1 until end of turn, and you untap them. With Enduring Vitality in play, those creatures can also tap for mana every time they untap. Once you have enough creatures in play, you can just combo off with Storm Chaser's Talent, and This Town Ain't Big Enough, since you can play the talent and then bounce it with This Town Ain't Big Enough. Then you replay the talent, untapping all of your otters, then you level it up and get back This Town Ain't Big Enough, cast it, and rinse and repeat. This makes your board lethal and makes you as many otter tokens as you want. So yeah, the talent is a pretty good card in a vacuum, and it's a nice combo piece, so I imagine the talent is going to continue to put up top 8s in Standard, and maybe Pioneer in the future. At number 4, it's Scavenger's Talent. For 1 black, it gives you a food token the first time 1 or more of your creatures die in a turn. You can take it to level 2 for 1 generic and a black, at which point anytime you sacrifice a permanent, target player mills 2 cards. Obviously, the level 1 trigger gives you food, which has a built-in sacrifice effect, and you can take it to level 3 for 2 generic and a black, at which point Scavenger's Talent lets you sacrifice 3 non-land permanents at the beginning of your end step, and if you do, you reanimate a creature from your graveyard with a finality counter. So Scavenger's Talent is very into sacrificing things and the graveyard, which is very on brand for a black card. It's done very little in Standard, but has quickly become an important card in Pioneer, where it found a home in Jund sacrifice decks. These decks run lots of ways to sacrifice things and lots of payoffs for doing so, like Mayhem Devil, so Scavenger's Talent can really go off, with all of its levels generating tons of value. Probably the sweetest interaction in the deck involves Cauldron Familiar. If you have the Familiar in play, you can just chump block with the Familiar every turn, then sacrifice the food it gives you and bring it right back, which really matters since it drains 1 life every time it enters. This obviously gets a lot better if you have some free sacrifice outlets, which the deck also has. Scavenger's Talent is going to continue to put up top 8s in Pioneer going forward. At number 3, it's Caretaker's Talent. For 2 generic and a white, this is a class that loves tokens. Its initial effect draws you a card whenever you create 1 or more tokens the first time each turn. You can take it to level 2 for 1 white mana, at which point you copy a token you control, which of course also means you get to draw a card because of level 1, and for 3 generic and a white, you can take it to level 3, at which point all of your tokens get +2/+2. The printing of Caretaker's Talent spawned mono-white control decks in both Standard and Pioneer, which are all about getting tons of values out of the talent by grinding out lots of tokens, often with Planeswalkers. Caretaker's Talent is in a great spot to continue to put up top 8s in both formats. At number 2, it's Innkeeper's Talent, a class that is all about counters. For 1 generic and a green, it gives you a +1/+1 counter at the beginning of combat on your turn. You can pay 1 green to take it to level 2, which gives your permanents with counters on them ward 1, and if you take it to level 3 for 3 generic and a green, it doubles the number of counters you put on permanents or players. If you play this in your first main phase, it gives you a counter the turn it comes down, which often gives you the ability to have a much better attack than you previously had, and even just the base level of the class is pretty strong because it can snowball so quickly, making your creatures harder to kill, and then augmenting your counter effects, including the talent's own effect, makes things even more difficult for your opponent. It's seeing play in both Standard and Pioneer Gruul aggro decks, which can generate even more value out of the level 1 effect as a result of Valiant on creatures like Emberheart Challenger and Heartfire Hero, since it gives you a repeatable and free way to trigger their Valiant abilities every turn. It's even seen some play in modern hardened scale decks, as it gives that deck another enchantment that loves counters. Innkeeper's Talent is going to continue to put up top 8s in multiple formats, and it's not impossible for it to be the number 1 card on this list someday. However, for now the number 1 card on this list is Ranger class. For 1 generic and a green, this class gives you a 2/2 wolf creature token when it enters. You can level it up for 1 generic and a green, at which point you put a +1/+1 counter on an attacking creature each turn. And if you take it to level 3 for 3 generic and a green, it lets you look at the top card of your library at any time, and you can cast creature spells from the top of your library. So the baseline here is basically a 2-mana 2/2, but this one has tons of upside. Getting a counter on each attack isn't too different from Innkeeper's Talent's base effect, and then in the late game, taking this to level 3 can give you some serious card advantage. In Standard, it was a key card in mono-green aggro decks, and in Pioneer, it was played in Winota decks. These decks were all about getting non-humans into play and attacking with them while Winota was in play, and then cheating humans into play from your library, tapped and attacking and indestructible. One of the best ways to do this was to run non-creature spells that make non-human creature tokens, like Ranger class. That way, you're going to hit as many cards as possible with Winota's attack trigger, and also trigger her as often as possible. These decks were pretty insane, so insane that Winota got banned in Pioneer, and since then Ranger class has slowed down significantly. It doesn't have any top 8 since 2023, and that means Innkeeper's Talent and Caretaker's Talent are probably going to be coming for it in the near future. So those are the top 10 class enchantments in Magic. If you'd like to add some class to your deck, check out the description where you can find a direct Card Kingdom link for each card that appeared in the video. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you catch future videos, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to catch up on past videos, including many more that look at mechanics and card subtypes, you should see a playlist on your screen shortly. Thanks for watching.